Welcome to First Sleep Aid, calm stories to help you unwind, learn, and fall asleep. From true crime to curious facts and thoughtful ideas, always softly spoken. Subscribe now and take a deep breath. You're in good hands.
Welcome. Today we're diving into the life of a truly remarkable figure, starting with a birth in West Germany, 1954, but an upbringing immediately defined by the division of her world.
That division is key right from the start, isn't it? Born West, raised East. It sets up this inherent duality.
And the silence she became known for later, it wasn't, shyness. It seems much more like a product of that environment. Memory, deep thought, always being prepared.
Yeah, learned response almost, something honed by necessity in the GDR.
So the catalyst for this Eastern upbringing was her father's choice in 57, Horst Kasner, a Lutheran pastor.
Right, he moves the family to the GDR, which was, well, unusual.
Definitely. A faith-based decision. Wanting to serve where the church was under pressure. Angela was only 3. They crossed into this world of surveillance.
And that decision, while theological, had huge political undertones in that context, didn't it? A West German pastor moving east. That sent a message.
Their home became Templin, north of Berlin. Looks idyllic, forests, cobblestones.
Postcard perfect.
But beneath that surface, constant scrutiny. The GDR was all about control, ideology. Any deviation was risky.
So you have this pastoral setting, masking a kind of panopticon reality, a perfect microcosm of the GDR's contradictions, really.
Exactly. And the Kasner family lived right in that contradiction.
Yeah.
A pastor's family in an atheist state.
West Germans in East Germany.
Right. Raised with all these restrictions, yet apparently encouraged to think for herself. It's a fascinating setup.
That experience navigating those opposing forces daily, you can see how that would shape someone. Learning the unspoken rules must have been critical.
Academically, she just soared. Math, physics, the logical stuff, and languages too, especially Russian. She won awards in Russian.
Which is fascinating, thinking ahead to her later relationship with, well, with Russian power.
Absolutely. So this grounding in logic, in verifiable facts, you can see the seeds of her later data-driven approach right there.
Yeah.
Very different from leaders driven by emotion.
It really points to a mind drawn to systems, to structure, to things that could be proven, perhaps as a contrast to the shifting ideology around her.
And it's in the GDR that those signature traits really develop, The carefulness, the measured words, that famous pause before speaking.
That pause is so telling, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
It wasn't just about finding the right word, it was probably about calculating the impact of the word in that specific environment.
Survival mechanism, really, not just a personality quirk.
Exactly. Learned behavior.
And it's crucial to understand, she wasn't, dreaming of becoming chancellor as a kid. That wasn't the story.
No, it seems much more about mastering systems, thinking deeply even when constrained, and learning how to be, well, present but maybe not fully visible.
That's a great way to put it. Present but invisible. Observing without drawing attention.
Which itself is a kind of power, isn't it?
It is. So the real legacy of East Germany for her wasn't ideology. Her father was a pastor, after all.
Right, that probably didn't stick.
No. It was discipline, understanding silence, knowing you're being watched but not revealing everything. That became the foundation.
Yeah, this intro really paints a picture of someone shaped profoundly by very specific, very unusual circumstances, not a typical path to power at all.
So let's dig a bit deeper into those formative years. The hostility towards religion in the GDR, it was intense.
Oh, absolutely. Churches were monitored, pastors were suspect, faith was basically seen as disloyalty to the party, wasn't it?
Pretty much. And yet, the Kasner household was this island of faith. You mentioned her father, Horst Kasner, son of a policeman, educated in the West.
And he chooses to go east for theological reasons. That voluntary act in that context, it's politically charged, even if not intended that way.
It immediately marked him as different, didn't it? Having connections, a history outside the GDR's control. That must have given Angela a really nuanced view of identity early on.
Definitely. This understanding of duality seems core to her, private truth versus public statements.
Right. And learning that being virtuous doesn't always mean you win, in worldly terms. Sometimes you have to bend a bit to survive the system without breaking.
That gap between private belief and public performance, recognizing that early on, it suggests a kind of resilience, doesn't it? Being able to navigate ambiguity. Skills you definitely need later.
The household itself sounds fascinating. Educated, modest, but always alert.
Books everywhere, lots of discussion.
And that detail about secretly tuning into West German TV, carefully, illegally. just getting a peek at the other side.
Yeah, that desire for outside information, for perspectives beyond the state narrative, it shows a real intellectual curiosity thriving even under restriction.
And crucially, her parents didn't seem to push ideology on her. It was about how to think, not what to think.
Analyzing, questioning, forming her own conclusions.
And faith provided this quiet internal structure, maybe a moral compass, within a regime that often seemed morally adrift.
That combination, critical thinking plus a strong ethical framework, that's a powerful foundation, isn't it? Seeking truth through reason and principle.
In school, she was brilliant, top marks in nearly everything.
But not flashy about it.
No, not fiery or rebellious. She just quietly outthought people. Intellectual superiority without needing the spotlight.
Which again points to that strategic mind. Competence over confrontation.
And in that conformist GDR society, she developed this strategy. Perfect outward compliance.
But keeping this inner distance.
Exactly. She joined the state youth groups, Young Pioneer, FTJ. You pretty much had to, right? For access to education, jobs.
Unavoidable.
But she later said you could play your part without letting it shape you.
That's a remarkable level of self-awareness and detachment for a young person in that system. Preserving your core self. A subtle resistance.
Her experience as a girl in science is interesting, too. The GDR talked a good game about gender equality.
But women in STEM were still pretty rare in practice.
Seemed so. And her response wasn't, activism. It was just to outperform everyone until they couldn't ignore her abilities.
Again, pragmatic, results-oriented, letting competence speak for itself.
So all these things, the religious background, being a woman in science, her intellect, they set her apart.
But she didn't broadcast it.
No. She learned to minimize attention on herself, maximize the effect of her work.
That focus on substance over style became such a hallmark later on.
So, yeah, no dreams of political power yet. But she was learning about power itself, wasn't she? That it isn't always loud, that independence can grow quietly under the surface.
Absolutely. These early years were a direct path to politics, but they equipped her with this incredibly unique toolkit, this way of seeing and navigating the world. Strategic thinking, reading systems, understanding quiet influence.
Okay, let's shift to her time in science. Despite the party controlling the narrative on, well, pretty much everything.
Right, defining truth.
She found this refuge in science. Discipline, objectivity. In 1973, she goes to the University of Leipzig to study physics.
Which was, as you said, a bit unusual for a woman then, especially from a religious family.
And you can see the appeal, can't you? In a world where ideology twisted facts, physics offered something different.
Immutable laws, evidence, things that weren't subject to the party line. Thermodynamics doesn't care about Marxism-Leninism.
She put it so simply later. Science was a space where I didn't have to lie.
Wow. That says everything, doesn't it? The intellectual and ethical sanctuary it provided in that environment. Her value for honesty, for objective truth.
And she excelled, but methodically. Lab work, precision, data, proof it suited her analytical mind perfectly.
That love for data, for systems, for structure, for rigorous proof, you see that thread running right through her entire career, even into the chancellery. Evidence-based reasoning.
After university, she becomes a research scientist in East Berlin, Central Institute for Physical Chemistry.
Right, focusing on quantum chemistry. Deep, complex work. She got her doctorate, Dr. Scherer-Nett.
So her life then sounds like experiments, data analysis, writing reports, quiet dedication.
Yeah, publishing papers, attending conferences, but keeping her head down politically, it seems, steering clear of direct involvement.
But even though she wasn't politically active, that scientific training gave her this lens, right? This objective observational skill.
Exactly. She's looking at the GDR system itself like a scientist would, noticing the cracks, the inconsistencies, the weaknesses, without necessarily commenting on them loudly.
And it's significant that she refused to work for the Stasi, the secret police, despite the pressures that existed.
That took courage. Real risk involved there.
And her later comment that science was the only place she felt she could do honest work in that system. It speaks volumes about her integrity and maybe her growing disillusionment.
Absolutely. That commitment to truth, to fact, even when inconvenient or risky.
And that fidelity to fact, honed in the lab, really did become a signature later as chancellor. Resisting ideology, focusing on pragmatic, data-driven solutions.
You can absolutely draw a straight line from the physics lab in Leipzig to the negotiating tables in Brussels. That analytical objective core remained.
By the 1980s, the GDR itself was clearly fraying. The economy was stagnant, culture repressed, the political system brittle.
Yeah, the signs were there, but the actual fall of the wall in November '89, That seemed to catch almost everyone off guard.
including Merkel. She'd built her life within this predictable, if restrictive, system.
Mm.
And suddenly, overnight, the foundation just shattered.
It must have been profoundly disorienting, thrusting this methodical scientist into the middle of, well, a revolution.
So November 9th, 1989, the wall comes down. Chaos, confusion, especially for the border guards.
Right, the rules changed so fast the checkpoints just opened under the pressure of the crowds.
And the atmosphere in Berlin must have been unbelievable. Disbelief, pure joy, East Berliners pouring into the West for the first time in decades.
An explosion of pent-up emotion and curiosity.
And what does Angela Merkel do? Reportedly, she goes to the sauna.
Which is just classic Merkel, isn't it? Sticking to her routine, finding that personal rhythm, that control, even as history is literally unfolding outside.
It really is telling. Not apathy, but maybe this need for internal processing, for stability amidst the chaos.
That inner discipline, resisting being swept away by the moment.
Later that night, though, she does go to a friend's place, and they cross into West Berlin together, just walking across, in disbelief.
And that quote of hers later about feeling like she'd have been thrown into a movie she didn't audition for.
It perfectly captures that feeling of sudden, unscripted reality shift, doesn't it?
Completely. She's 35, a scientist, no political ambitions, no Western experience to speak of. Her strengths are logic, reading systems.
And the system she'd mastered just became obsolete overnight.
Yeah. For some East Germans, it was pure liberation. For others, terrifying disorientation. For Merkel, seems like it was an invitation and a test.
And that quiet, observant nature she'd cultivated probably served her well then, allowing her to see things clearly amidst the upheaval.
Definitely. While others were perhaps caught up in the emotion she could analyze.
In the following weeks and months, East Germany starts to fracture. New political groups pop up everywhere.
A real sense of flux, of possibility, but also uncertainty.
And Merkel takes this cautious step into public life. She joins a small movement, Demokratischer Aufbruch, Democratic Awakening.
A minor player, really, in the grand scheme of things then.
But it had urgency. And Merkel saw a need, didn't she, for interpreters between East and West, people who understood both sides.
That ability to explain complex things clearly, logically, that became her strength, her calling card, even then, bridging that gap.
And incredibly, by the end of 1990, she's no longer just Dr. Merkel, physicist. She's an elected official in the Bundestag.
A staggering transformation in barely a year, ready to apply those analytical skills to the task of reunifying a country.
So, after the wall falls, East Germany doesn't just dissolve politically. Its whole structure, social, economic, starts to unravel incredibly quickly.
Yeah, leaving millions feeling adrift, their familiar world just vanishing.
And Merkel understood that feeling, right? Having lived and worked entirely within that system, she got the disorientation.
That firsthand experience was invaluable, even if understated, as reunification got underway.
Her joining Democratic Awakening wasn't some, bold grab for power.
Well,
It sounds like it was a very deliberate, almost scientific decision.
applying that same careful consideration, seeing an opportunity to contribute meaningfully during a time of huge change.
And what was she doing initially? Typing flyers, making calls, explaining policy to skeptical East Germans, real groundwork.
Essential stuff, but not glamorous, building trust from the ground up.
Then came the 1990 East German elections, the only free ones they ever had. Democratic Awakening didn't do great overall.
But Merkel stood out.
Exactly. Her intellect, her unique perspective, caught the eye of the CDU, the big center-right party from the West, looking to expand east.
And they saw her as an asset, didn't they? She ticked a lot of boxes.
Totally. Woman, educated, Eastern background, seen as unthreatening, technically fluent, and politically clean, no ties to the old regime.
She could give them credibility, relatability as they moved into the East.
So she takes a role with the CDU, and after reunification in October 1990, she's in the Bundestag representing Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
And suddenly she's in Bonn, the West German capital, a completely different world.
Oh yeah. Older, louder, mostly male. Established rules, power dynamics she hadn't encountered before.
And she didn't exactly burst onto the scene with charisma.
No, not flashy. Lacked that instinctive confidence initially. But she had this incredible ability to learn fast.
And to listen, really listen. Longer than most, maybe.
Her strategy seemed to be, wait, watch, make yourself indispensable, read everything, ask the smart questions.
Gathering data, understanding the system before trying to dominate it. Classic Merkel, even then.
So while her future wasn't crystal clear right away, it was obvious she wasn't just there for show. She'd entered politics to be effective, to contribute.
That initial careful navigation of the West German political scene is fascinating, not trying to blend in immediately, but to understand first.
So picture her arriving in Bonn, PhD in quantum chemistry, shy demeanor, no formal political training.
Walking into this world of polished, clubby West German politicians, the contrast must have been stark.
Totally. Their tailored suits versus her, apparently, more practical mail-order jackets, their handshakes and cigars versus her carrying her own files, speaking rarely.
And those early descriptions, awkward, soft-spoken, not political.
Because political in the West meant theater, alpha instincts, right? Things she didn't project.
But that was underestimating her key strength, wasn't it? That attentiveness. Watching the rhythms, the language, the alliances.
And crucially, remembering who underestimated her.
That's powerful. So instead of trying to quickly adopt their style, she held back, watched, gathered data, focused on learning the rules, not winning early applause.
A very scientific approach, really. Understand the parameters before acting.
And then just a year in, 1991, Chancellor Helmut Kohl appoints her Minister for Women and Youth.
And calls her mein Mädchen, my girl. Affectionate, maybe, but also...
A bit dismissive, paternalistic.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Kohl probably saw her as useful optics woman, Easterner, unthreatening.
But Merkel saw it as an opportunity, a foot in the door, a chance to learn the machinery of government.
And she took it seriously. Dived into the legislation, the bureaucracy, quietly built reliable networks, competence over flash.
Then in '94, she gets promoted to Minister for the Environment and Nuclear Safety. A much bigger portfolio, more visible, more risk.
Showing that her quiet effectiveness was being recognized, even if she was still underestimated overall.
It really highlights that strategy.
Yeah.
Stay underestimated just long enough to outlast the room. Her ambition was there, but defined differently, not about approval, but about being prepared and effective.
By the mid-90s, people within the CDU were noticing. Maybe she didn't fit the mold, but she gets things done.
That quiet effectiveness was becoming undeniable.
And environment minister, that's a tough gig. Nuclear safety, climate change, politically volatile stuff.
And her approach became clear. Study first, act later, avoid drama, own the outcome.
Then in 1995, she chairs the UN Climate Conference in Berlin, her first big moment on the world stage.
Still not a natural spotlight seeker, apparently, but diplomats noticed the preparation, right? The thoroughness, the ego-less negotiation, focused on results.
But inside the CDU, still largely seen as Kohl's girl.
Valued for loyalty, gratitude, her quiet nature. Kohl definitely underestimated her deeper game, it seems.
Because while she looked obedient, she was taking meticulous notes, wasn't she? On policy, power plays, favor trading, faction management, crisis handling, absorbing everything.
Learning the craft from the inside, from a master practitioner, even if he didn't realize how closely she was watching.
Then, late 90s, Kohl's authority starts to fade. Corruption scandals are bubbling up around the CDU.
The ground begins to shift under the old guard.
And suddenly, Merkel, still quiet, still underestimated by many, starts to look like the last adult in the room.
Respected for doing her homework, for her honesty, for somehow not having made loads of enemies in that cutthroat world.
Her rise wasn't dramatic. It was, as you said, almost mathematical, step by step. Compounding credibility, no scandals, no stumbles.
And that framing of her from the East, a woman, it kept happening, didn't it?
Yeah, making her visible, but maybe also seen as symbolic, a placeholder by some.
Which, paradoxically, might have helped her get promoted into roles where she could learn and grow without seeming like an immediate threat.
She got the details, the files, the tough assignments, maybe without the power base or protection.
And she just took them and did the work. Understanding that just outlasting a system built to exclude you is, in itself, a radical act.
That reserved, compliant image let her work under the radar while the guys chased headlines.
Reading the full memos, asking the extra questions, staying late, remembering everything about committees, votes, alliances.
And that interview style, seeming hesitant, then delivering this incredibly sharp, clear sentence. Disarming.
Patience plus memory, a potent combination in politics.
So she didn't break the CDU mold violently. She studied its fractures, waited for the inevitable collapse of the old power dynamic.
And then moved. Quickly, precisely, that Merkelian style emerging.
So 1998, Kohl loses the chancellorship after 16 years. The CDU is out of power for the first time in ages.
A massive shock to the system for the party.
And Merkel, publicly loyal, quiet, still seen by many as Kohl's girl.
Right. Playing the long game, perhaps?
Then comes the bombshell.
Yeah.
1999, the CDU funding scandal breaks wide open. Undisclosed donations, all tied back to coal.
And Kohl refuses to name the donors, citing honor, loyalty, even as the party is imploding around him.
The senior CDU figures. They hesitate. Silence. Unsure how to challenge the patriarch.
A moment of paralysis at the top.
And then Merkel makes her move. December 1999, she writes that op-ed in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung.
A calculated, calm, but absolutely brutal severing of ties.
The language was so precise, wasn't it? Thanking Kohl for his service, but stating the party had to move on, couldn't rebuild while he's stonewalled.
Quoting that line, the party must learn to walk again, and walking again means saying goodbye. Just devastatingly clear.
It was like a thunderclap, shattering that image of the obedient protege, showing real courage to say what others were maybe thinking but too afraid to voice.
It completely shifted the power dynamics overnight, didn't it? Paralyzed the old guard, opened up this space.
And she stepped right into it. Within months, she's general secretary of the CDU.
Running the party machine.
And by 2000, she's chairwoman, leader of the whole party.
An incredibly rapid ascent. But not through campaigning or demanding, more through being the one who stood firm while others wavered.
It wasn't seen as betrayal, exactly, but drawing a moral line, forcing a choice.
Though Kohl never forgave her, apparently. Felt abandoned.
But she understood that loyalty sometimes has to be to the institution, to what survives beyond individuals. That was the moment she stopped being a shadow figure.
Yeah, she emerged from that scandal cleaner than almost anyone else, having stood up to the man who made her. A defining moment.
So she leads the CDU for the next 5 years, rebuilding after the scandal, reshaping the message.
And quietly consolidating her power, absorbing rivals through sheer competence and presence.
But still, especially in the West, there's this perception. She's unproven on the big stage, lacks charisma, stage presence.
Especially compared to her opponent in 2005, Chancellor Gerhard Schröder.
Right, Schroeder was the opposite. Social democrat, prizefighter instincts, working class roots, quick wit, media savvy.
A real contrast in styles. The 2005 election looked like a tough fight for her.
Her campaign style was, well, Merkel-like. Modest, systematic, maybe overly careful. The message, Germany needs reform, and I'm not afraid of complexity.
While Schroeder attacked her lack of executive experience, critics questioned her tone, her camera presence, that infamous tabloid headline, "Can she even lead a country?"
And her response was just to focus on the substance, right? Fiscal discipline, socially responsible market economy, labor and tax reform without gutting the welfare state.
That seriousness, that lack of noise, maybe resonated with voters tired of political theater.
Because the election on September 18, 2005, it was incredibly close. A nail-biter.
CDU's CSU barely won. Schroeder's SPD right behind. No clear majority for anyone.
And the contrast on election night was stark. Schroeder defiantly refusing to concede on TV.
While Merkel was composed, clear, acknowledging the close result, but asserting her mandate.
Then weeks of tense negotiations followed. Backrooms, hard bargaining.
And Merkel brokers the deal for a grand coalition with the SPD, her main rivals. Bold move, strategic, even if unpopular with some purists in her own party.
And on November 22, 2005, she's elected chancellor. First woman, first East German, first scientist.
Not with soaring speeches or revolution, but with this sense of quiet inevitability, almost. The result of years of methodical work and strategic patience.
So she takes office in 2005, stepping into a system designed for, well, different kinds of leaders.
Yeah.
Not bold, Western, performative.
And her style of absorbing power slowly rather than radiating it confused a lot of people initially.
The media focused on superficial things, her clothes, her hair, her hands.
And underneath that skepticism, can a woman, an Easterner, a Protestant scientist, really lead Germany?
And she didn't really answer those questions directly, did she? She just got on with the job.
Yep.
Focused on the mechanics of government, the EU summits, outlasted the question.
Letting the results speak for themselves eventually.
Her leadership style felt almost radical because it lacked performance. Reading over reacting. Letting others exhaust themselves before making her move.
That first term governing in that grand coalition forced pragmatism. Labor law reform, balanced budgets, working across the aisle out of necessity.
And public perception started to shift, didn't it? From questioning her legitimacy to noticing, hey, she's getting results.
The EU presidency in 2007 was her first big international test.
And she passed it without spectacle. Coordinated a climate accord, managed EU expansion talks, revealed that restraint as strength signature.
By the end of that first term, she had studied Germany, which, in a country with Germany's history, is a deeply valued quality. Flamboyant leaders hadn't always ended well.
She was redefining power, wasn't she? As calculated, deliberate, immovable. Not necessarily inspiring, but incredibly solid.
Yeah, by her second year, it was clear she wasn't following the usual script. Few soaring speeches, no grand visionary posture.
But steadily consolidating power through sheer credibility.
And that public image, consistent, neutral, unreadable, became iconic. The calm voice, minimal gestures, the Merkel rot.
That habit of letting conversations run, choosing her moment, letting silence make others uncomfortable, very strategic.
That post-heroic leadership style. Rejecting drama, avoiding enemies, declining ideological warfare. But it wasn't indecision.
No, it was deliberate slowness, that quote. I'm not someone who acts on instinct. I wait, I observe, I look at the data, then I act.
Her method when facing challenges: out-research, outlast the noise, out-decide.
Orderly cabinet meetings, expecting preparation, focusing on solutions, not slogans.
Intentionally unreadable, brief press conferences, rarely quotable, refusing to reveal emotions or plans, keeping everyone guessing.
By 2009, she was the most popular politician in Germany, not because she moves people emotionally.
But because she made them feel safe, stable.
Exactly. Choosing stability, precision, endurance over speed and outrage, defining the environment rather than dominating the moment, that became the Merkel method.
And then came the Eurozone crisis in 2009, starting in Greece, spreading, threatening the euro itself.
Suddenly, everyone's looking to Merkel. Germany's economic strength made her the key player.
Even though she hadn't really sought that role, right? She was initially a cautious, nationally focused leader.
But the calls came. Save the euro. Bail out the struggling nations.
And she refused to rush. She pointed to failures in EU oversight, resisted German taxpayers footing the whole bill without conditions.
Which led to anger in Southern Europe. Protests, negative media portrayals, Merkel as the austerity enforcer.
While in Germany, many saw her as protecting taxpayers, upholding the rules. That famous line,
There is no Eurobond and there will be no Eurobond. Very firm.
Eventually, bailout packages happened, but with strict conditions. The European Stability Mechanism was created, her partnership with Sarkozy-Merkozy.
Europe survived, yes, but the cost was political division. Merkel became both savior and symbol of that divide. Her goal wasn't reshaping Europe, it was preventing collapse. Stability first.
That Greek crisis in 2010 really crystallized the narrative, didn't it? Debt, cooked books, collapsing banks, needing a bailout from Merkel.
And German public opinion was harsh. Greece was irresponsible, didn't deserve help.
While the Greek perspective saw Merkel as this punishing figure, eroding their sovereignty with austerity demands.
The protests in Athens, the anti-German symbols, even dredging up WWII trauma.
Yeah.
It got incredibly ugly.
It stopped being just economic. It became about power, history, national pride.
The austerity imposed on Greece caused immense hardship. European technocrats saw it as necessary medicine.
Ordinary Greeks experienced it as punishment, unfairness, destroying lives.
And Merkel held firm against unconditional bailouts, pushing for conditional aid to impose structure, fiscal discipline on the Eurozone.
But the optics were brutal, weren't they? A German chancellor demanding discipline from nations with those WWII memories. Incredibly difficult.
Her visit to Athens in 2012, amidst protests and heavy security. Her message was that careful balance. Germany stands with Greece, but responsibility must be shared.
A moment of huge misunderstanding, really. Her methodical approach to fixing a flawed system clashed with deep historical wounds. She had to carry both Germany's economic weight and its painful history. Quietly, as always.
By 2013, the EU absolutely relied on her. The broker, the cautious decision-maker.
Focusing on stability, realistic solutions, not grand visions for Europe, which made her the most powerful person on the continent, even if she didn't seem to enjoy it.
Her approach was practical, unshowy, avoiding triumphalism, especially given Germany's radioactive power history, as you put it.
The EU was partly built to contain Germany, and now Germany was its engine. Merkel understood that dilemma deeply.
She governed almost like she was still in East Germany. Avoid flamboyance, embrace restraint.
But the cracks in the EU remained, didn't they? French impatience, Southern anger, Eastern drift, the UK heading for the exit.
And Merkel represented power without dominance, responsibility without charisma, leading a Europe that didn't really want to be led.
Admired but distant in Germany, no scandals, no outbursts, a constant.
Across Europe, that consistency became addictive. Everyone looked to her in a crisis. She became the center of a union designed to avoid central power, a contradiction that defined her era. Germany wasn't seizing power, it was being forced to remember it had it.
Mm-hmm.
And she carried that weight carefully.
Then came the summer of 2015, those images of refugees, desperate journeys arriving in Europe.
Mostly from Syria, other conflict zones. The numbers arriving in Germany swelled rapidly by September, overwhelming resources.
Sparking both incredible volunteer efforts and ugly xenophobic protests. A real polarization.
And Merkel makes this unexpected move, doesn't retreat, steps forward. Early September 2015, she says, "Wir schaffen das. We can manage this."
A huge moment, followed by Germany suspending the Dublin regulation.
Effectively opening the doors, letting asylum seekers enter freely, apply in Germany.
And by the end of 2015, over 1 million refugees had arrived, a massive influx.
The reaction was immediate and intense. Supporters saw a humanitarian leader, a moral response.
Critics saw madness, recklessness, predicting chaos, and the rise of the far-right AfD party.
Merkel visited refugee shelters, pushed back against apologies for showing a friendly face in an emergency.
But the backlash was fierce, even within her own party, the CDU. People started questioning her leadership openly.
Behind the scenes, though, she was focused on management, wasn't she? Striking that controversial deal with Turkey to slow the flow, tightening rules internally.
But the public perception shifted. The country, once anchored by her calm, was now divided by her clarity. For the first time, she was the center of the storm, not the quiet consensus.
That political storm after the open-door policy hit hard. Divided country, nightly debates.
And her continued calm demeanor struck many as almost too calm, given the situation.
But this decision felt different, didn't it? More conviction than caution. A shift towards using moral power.
Supporters saw bravery, roots in her past, her scientific mind understanding obligations. Critics saw recklessness fueling the AfD surge.
And in 2016, she stood by it. "I would make the same decision again, based on values, not polls."
While behind the scenes, she was working to impose structure, processing cases faster, funding local governments, reforming security, strengthening borders.
That EU-Turkey deal was the pragmatic side. Necessary, maybe, but cold, ethically debated.
For her, it seems like leadership was balancing principles and reality without giving up on either. Moral engineering, perhaps, but politically costly.
The CDU lost key elections. Her approval ratings dropped significantly. That aura of stability cracked.
Yet her response was that simple statement, "I am responsible," carrying the decision as an accepted scar, not a burden or a triumph.
After the peak of the crisis, her world had changed. Coalition strained, the political center less solid.
And the AfD became a major national force, with her as their main target. Mother of the nation, mother of the strangers.
Loyalty eroded even within the CDU. Whispers of succession grew louder, public challenges to her leadership.
Then in 2018, the announcement. She'd step down as CDU leader, wouldn't seek another term as chancellor after 2021. Her choice, made with clarity.
Seen by some as retreat, by others as a quiet triumph of dignity, knowing when to leave.
Unlike many leaders, she seemed to understand the timing, preserving the integrity of her legacy, even if it was misunderstood.
And she never apologized for "Wir schaffen das," never turned it into a brand. For her, it seemed like a human obligation. Politically costly, yes, because moral clarity doesn't always win elections.
Germany slowly absorbed the wave, the immediate crisis passed, but the scars remained.
And Merkel bore those scars with acceptance, knowing she'd be remembered for knowing when not to please everyone.
It's striking how consistently she rejected charisma as the main tool of politics.
No frequent smiles, no raised voice, no dramatic gestures, no expressive wardrobe.
That careful speech rhythm, the pauses for thought, not drama, avoiding social media's curated warmth.
"I am not a show. I am here to work." That really sums it up. Made her an outlier in the age of populism.
Her credibility was earned incrementally, wasn't it? Accumulation, not sudden impact. That consistent, neutral, unreadable image became her brand in a way. The Merkel route.
Letting conversations run, speaking at the decisive moment, using silence as a tool.
That post-heroic style again, rejecting drama, ideological fights, but deliberate slowness, not indecision. I wait, I observe, I look at the data, then I act.
Out-research, outlast, out-decide. That was the method.
Orderly cabinet meetings, focused on solutions, not slogans. Brief, unquotable press conferences, never revealing emotions or plans.
By 2009, she was Germany's most popular politician. Not for moving people, but for making them feel safe. A steady light in a volatile world.
And that steadiness played out on the world stage, too. Think about her dynamic with Putin.
Right. He respects force, distrusts her traits. Woman, scientist, Eastern but not nostalgia careful.
That infamous 2007 Sochi summit incident with his dog, Coney, knowing she was afraid of dogs.
And her calm reaction, but reportedly commenting privately about his need to prove his manhood? Insightful, quietly assessing.
Then her relationship with Donald Trump, zero personal chemistry, obviously. Her quiet, prepared style versus his loud unpredictability.
Her strategy seemed to be, wait him out. Maintain alliances, preserve diplomacy where possible. Don't get drawn into his game.
With both Putin and Trump, the strategy was similar, wasn't it? Don't react, don't play their games, be the one still standing, focused on the long term.
Sharper private assessments, maybe, but public restraint.
For 16 years, she was this geopolitical constant. The quiet room amidst the shouting. Showing restraint could be a form of unshakable dominance.
And that scientific background was always there, wasn't it? The physicist, the chemist, bringing precision, discipline, a systems approach to politics.
Rational cabinet meetings, thorough preparation, recalling data points, that quote. You must always keep enough distance from the problem so you can think about it clearly.
Maintaining that intellectual distance. A solitary inner life, it seems. No big entourage. Preferred reading, quiet activities.
Her husband, Joachim Sauer, the reality check. No kids, no public family narrative. Very private.
Critics said she lacked vision, governed without heart. But she promised responsible governance, right? And she stood out by refusing to abandon reason in an emotional century.
Her endurance through crises partly came from that refusal to collapse into the moment, stepping back, seeing the whole problem. Like physics, not just politics. Quiet, proving to be the loudest strength.
So she starts her fourth and final term in 2018. Already broken records.
But the world landscape had changed. The international order was fragmenting.
And pressure was growing inside Germany climate, inequality.
Her role seemed to shift, becoming the axis, focused on preserving Germany's center for a stable handover.
Stepping down as CDU leader in 2018, but staying chancellor. Refusing to anoint a successor, letting the party figure it out.
She'd become more than a politician by then. An institution. A symbol of order.
Her final State of the Nation address emphasized duty over dominance.
Maybe that fourth term will be remembered for quietly preventing collapse. Legacy sometimes being about what you keep from falling apart.
Then COVID hits in March 2020. Her initial address to the nation, calm, factual.
Explaining exponential growth like a physicist teaching a class. Underscoring the seriousness without panic.
Germany's initial response was relatively good, wasn't it? Lower infection rates early on.
Her communication remained calm, fact-based, emphasizing societal responsibility to the Bundestag.
Cautious but firm on vaccines, championing scientific review over quick promises. Trusting the process.
In a moment of global panic, that steady scientific voice was what Germany seemed to need.
There were criticisms later, during subsequent waves, of course, but her tone remained consistent. No deflection of blame.
In her final year, amidst strongmen and slogans elsewhere, Merkel stood with the facts, showing that leading through fear requires light, not just loudness.
She'd signaled her exit clearly by 2018. That finality about not returning after 2021 was firm, quiet.
That commitment to leaving before people wished her gone seemed rooted in her East German experience, right? The dangers of political stagnation.
No clear successor groomed. Maybe intentionally so. Her leadership style was unique, not easily replicated.
Her final year seemed focused on thanking and listening, not campaigning or pitching her legacy.
Olaf Scholz wins the election. Merkel gives that short, dignified statement of well wishes.
A quiet departure. No grand farewell tour. Leaving Germany to slowly realize the absence of that dependable presence, that rare understanding of when to let go.
So 16 years. And she announces in 2021, no re-election, no drama, no theater.
Leaving while still respected, like a scientist concluding an experiment, as you said. Findings noted, work done.
That decision seemed rooted in that belief about democracy's fragility, leaders staying too long, lessons from the GDR.
And no groomed successor, maybe intentional, acknowledging her uniqueness.
Her final travels listening, thanking, not legacy building.
Scholz elected her brief, dignified concession, prioritizing the smooth transition.
That quiet exit. And the realization afterwards in Germany and Europe of the space she left. That power lies in knowing when to let go.
And after she left, despite stable institutions, the new government, there was this feeling, wasn't there? Something missing.
Inevitable comparisons with Scholz, maybe unfair, but highlighting what she represented.
More than a chancellor, a reference point, a measure of normalcy.
Her absence seemed to coincide with louder politics, a fracturing of the quiet she maintained.
Her restraint had become part of Germany's identity almost. Her absence raised questions. What do we believe now? What's the right tone for leadership?
That governance by subtraction, removing herself from the narrative, reducing her personality to essentials.
The space her absence created, was her style unique or teachable, a global impact, a missing access in Europe?
And she made so little effort to sculpt her legacy, didn't she? Just wanting to be remembered as someone who tried her best.
Believing legacy is earned over time management, trust not grand moments, offering method, navigation, not ideology or vision.
But the outlines are there. Preserving Europe, leading Germany steadily, reshaping leadership through steadiness, moral clarity.
No signature policy, no branded philosophy. Maybe intentional. The impact was cumulative, durable, not a flashy monument.
Her greatest legacy might just be that she governed as if it wasn't about her. Stability over inspiration. Quiet competence keeping things standing.
History loves drama, doesn't it? Charisma, big clashes. Merkel's career largely lacked that.
So her career is this quiet challenge to traditional ideas of greatness. Reliability, preparation, honesty, endurance versus flash and scandal.
Her stillness became an anchor in times of political, emotional extremes.
Calling her great, in that traditional heroic sense, feels wrong somehow. She seemed to value sufficiency, service, over ego-driven greatness.
Exactly. We often seek symbolic, inspiring leaders, but maybe what we'll miss most from Merkel is the quiet competence that just prevented chaos.
She didn't run as a woman, did she? Ran as confident, a problem solver.
Yet she became this huge symbol for women globally just by being there, doing the job effectively, actions over pronouncements.
Quietly navigating that male-dominated world, ignoring sexist commentary, focusing on the work.
Leading like Angela Merkel became enough, normalizing the image of a woman in that kind of power.
She didn't explicitly champion gender equity in a big way, but her structural presence made a difference.
Her impact on what it means to lead as a woman, it's still unfolding. She just did the job and quietly changed its perception for those who followed.
She governed during a time of European fracture, and arguably played a key role in stopping it falling apart completely.
Offering time, calm, continuity over grand schemes or radical changes.
Her power was often in stopping Europe falling backward, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Shaping the continent through restraint and competence.
So while there aren't grand Merkel monuments in Brussels, her influence is in the fact that Europe, imperfectly, is still standing. The silence she carried became a foundation. Modern Europe owes more to her steadiness than we can probably measure.
So we've covered a huge amount of ground today, tracing this incredible journey from a divided Germany to the heart of European power.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to revisit how those formative years navigating East Germany, the power of silence, the scientific rigor, that sense of responsibility, really shaped her entire approach to leadership.
The surprising turns, too. Scientist to politician. That unconventional path to power, built on competence and restraint, not charisma.
And looking back at the huge challenges of the Euro crisis, the refugee crisis, global shifts, her methodical, almost unflappable approach was so consistent, wasn't it?
It really was. Which leaves us with those big questions about her legacy. What is leadership greatness? The impact of her being a woman in power, even without emphasizing it. Her sheer steadiness shaping modern Europe.
Definitely lots to think about. And maybe the final thought for you, listening, is this. In our noisy, volatile world, what can we learn from Merkel's very different style? Does that emphasis on quiet competence, on long-term stability over short-term wins, offer a different way to think about effective governance today?